Spiritual Fitness Guide. In well over 100 pages, it mentions God one time. That's it. It mentions feelings 11 times. It even mentions playfulness, whatever that is, 9 times. There's zero mention of virtue. The guide relies on New Age notions, saying that the soldier's spirit consists of consciousness, creativity, and connection. The guide itself reports that around 82% of the military are religious, yet ironically it alienates our warfighters of faith by pushing secular humanism. In short, it's unacceptable and unserious, so we're tossing it. I have a directive right here that I will sign today to eliminate the use of the Army Spiritual Fitness Guide effective immediately.
This may look like a routine policy update inside the Pentagon, but it's actually a referendum on how the U.S. military defines strength, purpose, and institutional identity. What's really being tested here is whether long-standing traditions can coexist with modern bureaucratic frameworks without being hollowed out. This raises broader questions about neutrality versus erasure and about who decides what values are preserved inside national institutions. In this video, we'll break down how a single training guide became a symbol of a deeper cultural conflict within the armed forces.
I'm here to tell you about a real problem facing our nation's military. It's one you're probably not aware of, but it's a really important one. And it's been going on for far too long. The weakening of our Chaplain Corps. You see, chaplains are intended to be the spiritual and moral backbone of our nation's forces. George Washington established the Chaplain Corps in 1775, one of his first actions as General of the Continental Army. Congress authorized chaplains for the Navy that very same year. In Washington's general orders, he explained their importance, quote, "The blessing and protection of heaven are at all times necessary, but especially so in times of public distress and danger." For about 200 years, the Chaplain Corps continued its role as the spiritual leader of our service members, serving our men and women in times of hardship and ministering to their souls. But sadly, as part of the ongoing war on warriors, in recent decades, its role has been degraded. In an atmosphere of political correctness and secular humanism, chaplains have been minimized, viewed by many as therapists instead of ministers. Faith and virtue were traded for self-help and self-care. If you need proof, just look at the current Army Spiritual Fitness Guide. In well over 100 pages, it mentions God one time. That's it. It mentions feelings 11 times. It even mentions playfulness, whatever that is, 9 times. There's zero mention of virtue. The guide relies on New Age notions, saying that the soldier's spirit consists of consciousness, creativity, and connection. The guide itself reports that around 82% of the military are religious, yet ironically it alienates our warfighters of faith by pushing secular humanism. In short, it's unacceptable and unserious, so we're tossing it. I have a directive right here that I will sign today to eliminate the use of the Army Spiritual Fitness Guide effective immediately. These types of training materials have no place in the War Department. Our chaplains are chaplains, not emotional support officers, and we're going to treat them as such. That's why today at my direction, we are also simplifying the faith and belief coding system. In recent years, it ballooned to over 200 overly complex faith and belief codes. An overwhelming majority of the military population only uses 6 codes. 11 are not used by anyone. So we're going to streamline it and move it to a new list of religious affiliation codes so that our chaplains can actually use it to minister better to the flock. More reforms will be coming in the days and weeks ahead. There will be a top-down cultural shift, putting spiritual well-being on the same footing as mental and physical health, as a first step toward creating a supportive environment for our warriors and their souls. We're going to restore the esteemed position of chaplains as moral anchors for our fighting force. The 1956 Army Chaplains Manual states, quote, "The chaplain is the pastor and the shepherd of the souls entrusted to his care," end quote. This is a high and sacred calling. But this only works if our shepherds are actually given the freedom to boldly guide and care for their flock. Stay tuned for more. We are going to make the Chaplain Corps great again. And Merry Christmas.
The moment that just unfolded was not a policy footnote or a bureaucratic adjustment. It was a declaration. A senior defense leader standing before the country and saying plainly that something fundamental inside the U.S. Army had gone wrong and that it would no longer be tolerated. When Pete Hegseth called the Army's spiritual fitness guide unacceptable and announced its immediate elimination, he wasn't simply canceling a document. He was drawing a line between two competing visions of what the American military is meant to be. For more than 2 centuries, the Chaplain Corps existed for a specific reason. Not as an accessory, not as a wellness add-on, but as a moral and spiritual foundation for men and women placed in situations that test the limits of endurance, conscience, and purpose. That history was not invented for political effect. It was established at the very birth of the nation, when George Washington himself insisted that faith and moral grounding were essential in times of danger and national trial. That legacy carried through generations of service, conflict, and sacrifice. And yet, as Hegseth made clear, something shifted. Quietly at first, gradually. Over time, the language of faith was replaced with the language of abstraction. The vocabulary of virtue gave way to frameworks of feelings. A guide meant to address the spirit of the soldier managed to mention God only once across more than 100 pages, while repeatedly emphasizing emotional states and undefined concepts. In an institution where the vast majority of service members still identify with a religious tradition, the official guidance began to speak as if belief itself were an inconvenience. That contradiction matters. Not because one worldview must dominate another, but because leadership has consequences. When institutions strip away meaning in favor of neutrality, they do not create balance, they create emptiness. And in environments where clarity, conviction, and trust are essential, emptiness is not neutral. It is corrosive. What we witnessed was not a rejection of care for the individual. It was a rejection of confusion. Hegseth did not argue against mental or physical well-being. He argued that spiritual well-being cannot be reduced to self-help language without losing its essence. Chaplains are not therapists by another name. They are ministers, shepherds, moral anchors. And when an institution redefines them into something softer, vaguer, and safer, it quietly abandons the very role they were created to serve. The numbers alone tell the story. Hundreds of faith and belief codes bloated into a system so complex it served no one. Dozens of categories unused, 6 doing nearly all the work. This was not inclusion, it was institutional drift. And drift in any large system is rarely accidental. It reflects priorities, or the absence of them. By eliminating the guide and streamlining the system, the message was unmistakable. Clarity matters again. Purpose matters again. The Chaplain Corps will no longer be treated as an afterthought or a symbolic presence. It will be restored to its original standing, not elevated above others, but placed back where it belongs. This moment also reveals something larger about the American system. Bureaucracies tend to expand. Language becomes diluted. Intent gets buried under layers of policy written to avoid offense rather than to pursue truth. Reversing that momentum requires more than quiet revisions. It requires public accountability. It requires someone willing to say out loud that an entire framework has failed. That is what makes this moment significant. It was not cautious, it was decisive. The directive was signed immediately. The change was effective immediately. No task force, no extended review period, just action. In an era when leadership is often defined by delay and deflection, clarity itself becomes an act of leadership. But the deeper question lingers. What does a nation owe the people it sends into harm's way? Is it enough to provide equipment, training, and benefits? Or does it also owe them meaning, something stable to hold on to when everything else becomes uncertain? For generations, the answer was clear, and then slowly it became negotiable. Hegseth's announcement suggests that the negotiation is over, that spiritual grounding will no longer be treated as optional or outdated. That tradition, when rooted in service rather than politics, still has a place. And that caring for the whole person means acknowledging the role of belief, not editing it out. The final words of the statement were telling. A reference to a decades-old manual describing chaplains as pastors and shepherds. A reminder that this role only works if those entrusted with it are allowed to act freely and fully. That freedom is not about privilege, it is about integrity. Moments like this rarely make headlines for long, but they shape institutions quietly over time. They determine what is valued, what is protected, and what is restored. And they force a broader reckoning with how far systems can drift before someone finally says, enough. This was not just about a guide. It was about restoring moral clarity in an institution that depends on it. About acknowledging that strength is not only measured in readiness and resilience, but in conviction and purpose. And about recognizing that leadership sometimes means undoing what should never have been done in the first place. If you believe these moments matter, if you believe accountability, tradition, and moral clarity deserve scrutiny and defense, then stay with us. Subscribe to Liberty Report USA. Support our work to expose the truth.